Meet the A-10 Thunderbolt II, or as guys who actually fight wars like to call it, the Warthog. Yeah, it's ugly. Yeah, it's slower than your grandma's Buick. But if you're on the ground surrounded by bad guys with machine guns and RPGs, this is the exact noise you want to hear. Today we're diving into why this freakishly tough, borderline obsolete Cold War relic refuses to die. Because every time the Air Force tries to kill it off, the Army and Marines basically flip a table and shout, "Not today, flyboys." Alright, let's roll back the tape. It's the late 1960s, Vietnam's a mess, the Air Force is still obsessed with high-speed, high-altitude dogfighters, and the Army is learning the hard way that helicopters are easy targets for Soviet machine guns. Meanwhile, NATO is sweating bullets over Eastern Europe, because parked just across the border from West Germany is the biggest armored fist in human history. Thousands of Soviet T-55s and T-62s just waiting to roll across the Fulda Gap and turn Frankfurt into a smoking crater. Enter the need for a dedicated close air support platform. The A-1 Sky Raiders in Vietnam did great, but they were Korean War leftovers. The Army wanted attack helicopters, but the Air Force wanted to keep control of anything that flies. So the Pentagon told the Air Force, "You better come up with something to kill tanks or we're giving it to the Army." In 1970, the Air Force kicked off the AX competition. The goal? A flying tank killer. Something that could loiter for hours, shrug off ground fire, and absolutely ruin Ivan's day. Two main contenders stepped up. The Northrop YA-9 kind of looked like a stubby airliner with guns bolted on. The Fairchild Republic YA-10, which basically was a flying gun with wings slapped on as an afterthought. In 1973, after a series of fly-offs that included strafing old tanks in the desert, the Air Force went with the YA-10, mainly because the entire plane was built around one monstrous hunk of machinery, the GAU-8 Avenger. Let's talk about this gun. The GAU-8 is a 30mm, 7-barreled Gatling gun that fires depleted uranium shells at 3,900 rounds per minute. The whole setup weighs about 4,000 pounds, which is literally more than an entire VW Beetle. When people joke that the A-10 is just a gun that someone decided to give wings, they're only half kidding. The plane's landing gear was offset to fit the cannon's ammo drum. Even the engines and tail were positioned to keep the recoil from ripping the plane in half. And that's the first big reason why ground troops love the Warthog. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, makes bad guys soil their pants like hearing that echo across the valley. Alright, so we've got a flying gun, but how do you keep it alive long enough to actually kill tanks? That's where the Warthog's freakish survivability comes in. The A-10's pilot sits in what's basically a titanium bathtub. 1,200 pounds of armor plating that can take direct hits from armor-piercing rounds up to 23mm. It's not there to stop the plane from being shot. It's there to make sure the pilot doesn't get shredded when it does get shot. But that's just the start. The A-10 has redundant hydraulics, self-sealing fuel tanks, and manual reversion that literally lets the pilot fly the plane using cables and brute leg strength if the hydraulics are gone. There are documented cases where half of the wing got blown off and the hog still flew home. Fast forward to 1991, Saddam Hussein decides Kuwait would make a nice little annex to Iraq, and the US, along with a giant international coalition, comes to kick him out. This is where the A-10 goes from quirky Cold War idea to absolute legend. During Operation Desert Storm, A-10s destroyed over 900 Iraqi tanks, more than 2,000 other military vehicles, and thousands of artillery pieces. Pilots flew low and slow, hunting T-72s like it was open season. And they took hits. We're talking direct SA-7 and AAA impacts. Holes punched clean through wings, entire hydraulic systems shredded, and they still went back to base. There's a famous photo of an A-10 with its horizontal stabilizer almost completely missing. The pilot landed it without a sweat. Now jump ahead to the 2000s. Iraq, Afghanistan, counterinsurgency. Urban fights where the bad guys pop out with RPGs from rooftops. That's where the A-10 became practically a religion for ground troops. Ask any infantrymen who fought in Fallujah or Helmand. When the radios crackle with "hog inbound," you can almost see the collective sigh of relief, because they know there's about to be a 30mm rainstorm on whoever's ruining their day. There are hundreds of radio recordings where you hear JTACs giggling like kids on Christmas because the A-10 just stitched a tree line full of insurgents with DU rounds. It's not pretty, but it's effective. And now here's the weird part. The very branch that owns the A-10, the United States Air Force, has tried to kill it off more times than you can count. Why? Politics and money. The Air Force sees itself as a high-tech force with stealth jets and fancy bombers. Close air support isn't sexy. It's messy, dangerous, and frankly something they'd rather pawn off on drones or fast movers like the F-35. So every few years, the brass rolls out a new plan to retire the A-10. Congress, spurred on by very loud Army and Marine generals, usually tells them to shove it. Because until you can prove a stealth fighter can loiter for hours and shoot up Taliban with pinpoint 30mm fire without scaring the grunts, the Warthog isn't going anywhere. Alright, let's get nerdy. You've seen the memes, you've heard the legends. The A-10 slows down when it fires because the recoil is so powerful. Sorry Internet, that's mostly nonsense. Yes, the GAU-8 Avenger puts out about 10,000 pounds of recoil force. But the engines on the A-10 make roughly 18,000 pounds of thrust. So does it slow down? Technically for a millisecond maybe. But the effect is so tiny the pilots don't even feel it. What's way cooler is that the entire gun is mounted slightly off center. So when it fires, the recoil lines up directly through the center of mass. Otherwise the nose would yank sideways every time they pulled the trigger. There are enough insane A-10 save stories to fill entire books. Here's a couple. In Afghanistan, a Marine unit pinned by Taliban ambush radioed for help. Visibility was garbage. The pilot dropped below the clouds, found the muzzle flashes, and laid down 30mm right over the Marines' heads, driving the Taliban back into the rocks. Another A-10 once came back with one engine shot out, half a tail missing, and more than 300 holes in the fuselage. The pilot landed it, climbed out, and reportedly said, "She's a little rough, but she'll live." It's these moments that turn the A-10 from just a warplane into a kind of a folklore figure. So what's next? The Air Force still wants to retire the Warthog by the mid-2030s. They say the F-35 can handle close air support. Army brass mostly laughs. They've run side-by-side demos. The A-10 gets more hits, loiters longer, and takes more punishment. Meanwhile, drones are changing the game. Precision loitering munitions like the Switchblade might take some of the A-10's future jobs. But on days when the weather sucks, or you need a giant titanium bathtub with a monster cannon circling overhead for hours ready to on call, there's still nothing quite like the Warthog. End of the day, ask any grunt who's ever had an A-10 save their bacon. The Air Force might see an aging, ugly Cold War relic, but to ground troops, it's an angel in green and gray camo, belching smoke and spent shells with teeth painted on the nose. Because for all the tech and tactics, sometimes victory comes down to hearing that glorious 30mm cough echo across a valley and knowing that, for today at least, you get to go home. And that's why the A-10 refuses to die. I'm Dave Newton. Like, subscribe, and if you've got your own hog story, drop it in the comments. We'll see you on the next one.